Hey, welcome back PVA students to our next lesson here in U.S. history. Today we're going to be covering 9.1, the New Deal. Now, up to this point, we've covered the causes and results of the Great Depression, including the Dust Bowl. And today we're going to talk about how the United States is going to start to kind of claw its way out of this particular economic and ecological catastrophe that has struck the nation during the late 20s and early 30s. Now, in 1932, we're going to get a new president, and that new president is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's the former governor of New York, and he's better known as FDR. And when he becomes the president of the United States, he's going to promise decisive action to fight against the Great Depression. And so in 1933, his most immediate job was going to be to help the unemployed. And at this time, unemployment was near 25%. Nearly 1 out of every 4 Americans that were willing and able to work were out of a job. So this doesn't even include like kids and stay-at-home moms and all this kind of stuff. This is 25% of the workforce is out of work. This is a huge, absolutely huge number. Now, during this time, what he's going to start off with, he's going to start his presidency off with what is called the 100 days. And pretty much every president since then has been kind of judged against this standard. What have they done during essentially the first 3 months of their presidency? And so in that first 100 days in office, he's going to start to introduce into Congress a broad series of legislation, or those are just laws, to try and attack the Great Depression. And it becomes known as the New Deal. And so the New Deal is going to be focused on trying to help, especially, like I said on the previous slide, the unemployed Americans that are out there. Now, it's going to focus on 3 major areas, and they're referred to as the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Relief were to try and help people right away, giving out like checks to people that were unemployed. We see that today. I mean, ideas like, the stimulus checks. I mean, that's an idea of relief, immediate help to Americans. Recovery was to try and kind of help Americans kind of work their way out of this particular economic problem. And reform was to make sure that it didn't happen again. And there's going to be a bunch of programs. They're each going to fit into kind of one of these different 3 categories. Well, the first one that we're going to talk about really kind of fits into this idea of reform. And the New Deal had really kind of created these kind of long-term reforms trying to address the causes of the Great Depression. And one of the first of these major reforms was the creation of what is called the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC. Now, the SEC has nothing to do with Southern football or basketball or anything like that, but it has to do with regulating the stock market. And as we know from the previous lesson over the Great Depression, one of the major causes of that Great Depression was the failure and collapse in the stock market. And a lot of that was due to how people bought and sold stocks. Then the Securities and Exchange Commission, their entire job was to try and make sure that how people bought and sold stocks was not going to get us in trouble again. And so the SEC helped to prevent another crash. Another major problem that had led to a lot of pain in the economy at this time was the failure of the banking system. And banks had closed by literally the thousands in early 1932 and 1933. And so a new organization was also created during this first 100 days called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC. And the whole idea behind this was to insure bank accounts, meaning that if the bank went out of business, you didn't lose all your money in your bank account. And what that did was this gave people the confidence to start putting money back at the banks. And if banks have money, then banks can loan that money out. And this allowed money to circulate through the economy much better than it had before. And this was super important to making sure the economy would be able to start to recover, was being able to allow banks to work. And so it's really important for you to know that both the FDIC and the SEC help to achieve the goal of preventing the reoccurrence of conditions that contributed to the Great Depression by solving those problems in both the banking sector and in the stock market as well. But another area of the economy that needed reform was also in industry and in farming, and we needed to recover these areas. So we reformed the financial areas. We now needed to recover things like the farming industry, which had been hit really, really hard with things such as the Dust Bowl. And so they created programs such as the AAA, otherwise known as the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And the entire idea was to help to stimulate and help out farmers and agriculture in general. And so what the AAA did is it actually paid farmers to not grow crops. The idea behind this is that this would reduce the supply of food, which seems kind of weird, right? Why would you want to grow less food? But if you have less food, you would have higher food prices. And this would help out farmers who had gotten a lot of trouble during the 1920s because of low food prices. So reduce supply and increase price was the idea behind this. Now, the AAA definitely did help farmers, but it was never really kind of enough to totally stimulate the economy. And so we needed to do some other things to kind of get things rolling. Well, another way to do this was to help out people that were in poverty or people that were older or disabled. We had a lot of people that were unemployed. So if you could actually take people out of the labor force, then you could open up jobs for people that wanted them. And one of the ways we did this was the creation of the Social Security Act. And the Social Security Act gave old age pensions to people that were over 65 years old. And it paid for with a tax on people that were currently working. Now, this program is starting to run out of money today, in part because people are living a lot longer and there's a lot more people on Social Security than there ever was before. But the idea behind this was that this would allow people to retire. Then that would allow them to open up a job, to give a job to one of those 25% of Americans that were unemployed. But the Social Security Act became really America's first major welfare program, and it provided payments not only for people that were older, but also people that could not work, that were blind or handicapped, needy children. So it did a lot to help those people out. Now, another group of people that needed help at this time were industrial workers. And one of the most important reforms at this time was the passage and creation of the Wagner Act. Now, this law, what it did was it protected a worker's right to strike and to collectively bargain. And it also created the Fair Labor Practices Commission to regulate unfair practices used by companies to discourage union memberships. Now, as a result of the Wagner Act, union membership in the United States increased dramatically, as we can see from that particular graph. So what we've seen is that during the New Deal, this first 100 days in office and in the subsequent years, because a few of these programs were passed a few years later, FDR's New Deal, all of these new programs, really we see these social programs become greatly expanded during this particular time. And really, out of all of this, one of the most important results of the New Deal, just in general, was that it increased the power of the federal government. So we've covered a bunch of these programs today, and this is only scratching the surface of all of the different programs. There were literally dozens of programs that helped in dozens of different ways. But we've hit the highlights of the major ones that you need to know, including the Wagner Act, Social Security, agricultural reform, banking reforms, all become really, really important to helping to get America back to work during the 1930s. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. Until next time, hope everyone has a great day. Bye for now.